Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is the Holosun 515 red dot sight. Actually, it isn't, because this is the green reticle, but we'll talk about that. What we're talking about is Holosun's solution to a simplified, compact, lightweight rifle optic. Although you could put it on something else, I mounted it on a rifle. And what I wanted to see is Holosun's offering is going to continue to surprise me, because at this point I've kind of, if you're familiar with the channel, I've reviewed quite a few of their optics and I found them to be, at least initially, surprisingly reliable. Now I'm getting used to that, which means if I happen to review a new Holosun optic or a new offering from Holosun and it's not reliable, it's going to be very surprising. So going into this as objective as possible, I wanted to see if this somewhat unofficial industry standard footprint for rifle optics was going to provide the same kind of reliability performance that I've come to expect from their pistol line of optics. Getting into the features of the 515, this particular model is the 515 GT GR, which is the green reticle. It gives you a 2 MOA dot with an optional 65 MOA reticle. You can turn that ring off, that segmented circle if you will. You can run just the 2 MOA dot, the 2 MOA dot with the segmented circle reticle, or just the segmented circle reticle, which may be useful for some people such as like a shotgun, because it gives you kind of a projected RDS version of like a ghost ring sight or something similar to that. We're dealing with a titanium housing, titanium body, which in Holosun's other optics have proven to be very, very reliable, very durable. It has a shake awake setting. This particular model does not have the solar panel, so we're running strictly off of battery power, which is a 2032 kind of, again, unofficial industry standard for the larger optics is to run that 2032 almost quarter size battery. Looking at possible 50,000 battery lives on setting 6. You go up from that, you're going to somewhat decrease that, but if you do your math, 50,000 hours, even half of 50,000 hours is going to give you a calendar year of battery life in between replacements. And realistically, you'll probably be able to sneak 2 years out of the optic if you really wanted to. 10 brightness settings for daytime or nighttime use, and also 2 night vision settings, which is very intriguing to me because I do like to shoot quite a bit of night vision shooting, and I like to do passive aiming quite a bit, which is the act of actually looking through a reticle optic with the night vision instead of using like a laser. And there's reasons why you might want to do that, other than the fact it's very similar to daytime shooting. My review process, as always, is very straightforward. We're going to do 2,000 rounds on the optic. The very first thing we're going to do after we get that optic zeroed is we're going to put it through what I like to call the burn down, which is 500 rounds as quickly as possible. Plenty of optics and plenty of accessories and plenty of firearms can handle 500 rounds of fire, but can they handle 500 rounds of fire as quickly as possible? Because there are things that you may see, problems that may develop when an optic gets hot or a firearm gets hot, that you wouldn't notice if you took that same 500 rounds and spread it out over 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 months. So I wanted to see that initial 500 rounds if it was going to cause any issues. Mainly with optics, what I'm looking for in a burn down is if the increased rate of fire, that increased heat, and the heat, as metals start to heat sink at different rates based on different materials and different precisions and what have you, is going to cause the reticle to shift or fade or flicker or really behave strangely in any way whatsoever. So here's your burn down. 500 rounds without an issue. Something I've seen with some optics in the past, like I kind of mentioned before we got into that 500 round burn down, is when the firearm got hot based on where the optic was mounted, based on where the heat was kind of making contact with the mount into the optic body, the optic would kind of, or the reticle I should say, would kind of fade or start to flicker a little bit because that heat was getting into the electronics. That's not something I experienced with the 515. So moving forward, I know that it can handle an almost unrealistic amount of fire in a very short period of time. In fact, you know, working that on the select fire, definitely kind of tested its extreme realism functionality. And realistically, you're probably never going to shoot 500 rounds at one sitting as quickly as I do. So you can rest assured that the optic can handle that short frequency of fire and the heat that it creates. After the burn down, I just continued to get myself acclimated with the optic. One of the things that I was initially kind of apprehensive about was the green reticle. I've been using red reticles since, well, red reticles. And I've never really seen a reason or kind of thought to myself, man, I wish I had a different colored reticle. I wish that that was something that existed. I really need an alternate color other than red. That's not something, that's a thought I never had, because red works the best against multicolored backgrounds. Now they say, and there is some great truth to this, that the human eye picks up green better than any other color, and there's some anthropological reasonings behind that, and I tend to believe that. However, I've never really had a problem picking up a red reticle when it was set to the appropriate brightness setting. So I didn't understand the reasoning behind a green reticle other than offering a different color. And maybe for some people the green would be preferential. For me, it's not something I necessarily need, but I was pleasantly surprised in the fact that the green reticle actually works very well. It has a very good contrast against multiple backgrounds, even though I am in Georgia predominantly, and my backdrop is usually green or has some green in it. Although it's very rare I shoot at green targets. If I was using this reticle offside, or out of a range environment against an actual natural backdrop that I'm likely to encounter here in the South, the green reticle is going to be noticeable. It's going to provide the contrast I need to differentiate between not the reticle and the reticle. Holosun also offers the segmented circle, various sizes on their handgun, their MRDSs, reticles. I usually turn it off because it fills up a lot of the window and it's not something I necessarily need, although it could be beneficial to some shooters. On the rifle, it could serve very much the same purpose. If someone is newer to the AR platform or whatever you happen to be mounting the optic on, and they're still getting acclimated to using an RDS on a rifle, or a rifle and an RDS at the same time, that segmented circle can greatly aid them in picking up and then moving their eyes to the center of the dot and then placing that sight package on their desired point of impact. So having that reticle there, for one benefit, is for newer shooters, it does make it a little bit easier to acquire that center to-and-away dot. Outside of that, on a rifle, I usually leave that segmented circle reticle on because it does provide me with some convenient holds for certain distances, or in really extreme situations, the ability to gauge windage at distance. So if I'm using a non-magnified optic to shoot out to 250, 300, even 400 yards, based on the round and my zero distance, that segmented circle can come in handy. So I like the option for it to be there. I also like the option to turn it off very easily if I wanted to. The controls on this optic are very intuitive, very easy to access. I've got an up button and a down button, and I have a hold position on either one of those buttons to change reticle behavior. Because this model is battery powered only, I don't have to worry about cycling through power options, which is something I prefer. If I can get a year battery life out of an optic, I don't need a second battery or a second power source. So for me, it not having the solar panel didn't bother me at all, because it's not something I was going to use anyway. Reticle brightness is what you would expect. I've got multiple brightness settings, and they worked in every environment I use the rifle in. Sunlight, of course, being the most common, but even with the sun behind me or the sun behind my targets on whatever range I happen to be using, I didn't have any acquisition issues. The brightness was there. The brightness is what I wanted it to be. In low light settings, pushing weapon light down range, even super bright weapon lights, because those are the only weapon lights I use, I didn't have the reticle wash out, and I didn't find myself really having to fiddle or adjust with the brightness settings regardless of conditions. I set it on setting 7, and that's pretty much the setting I use the entire time throughout the entire review process, except for when I wanted to check out the night vision settings. Like I said earlier in the video, I'm a big fan of passive aiming. So using the night vision settings, I was initially apprehensive, and this is a little bit unfounded for me because I've already gone through this with their pistol optics, that the 2MOA dot with the segmented circle, a secondary reticle if you will, was going to create too much blooming in my night vision. And that wasn't my experience at all. I could still differentiate, and some of this is the quality of the night vision too. If you don't have a very good night vision setup or a very good quality tube, you may not have this experience. However, with my night vision, my PVS-15s, which are white phos, I was very easily able on night vision setting 1 and night vision setting 2 to differentiate between the 2MOA and the ring. So I could leave that reticle on. I didn't have to drop down to just the dot in order to use those night vision settings. Of course, the elephant in the room is always durability, right? The body lends itself very well to being durable. It's titanium housing. Your elevation and windage adjustments are not only captured, cap protected, but the body provides two shrouds to assist in protection in the event of an inadvertent or an on-purpose drop. But you know me, I'm going to drop stuff. And the reason I drop optics is to establish a consistent, although not technically scientific, goalpost for durability. More so with pistol optics, but every optic gets the drop. I want to apply a great deal of consistent shock to the optic body to see if that causes any issues, namely breakage, but also if it knocks it out of zero. That's something I want to know about. Of course, the disclaimer is anytime an optic takes a spill, you should check the zero if possible before using it. You shouldn't trust that zero even if you know the optic is durable, just because ultimately that zero determines where your rounds go and you want to be 100% accountable for that. So every 500 rounds, I'm going to do a shoulder height drop on any optic that I'm going to review. And I use the shoulder height drop because I'm going to stay the same height, relatively speaking. And hard surfaces are going to remain hard surfaces. So this isn't to simulate people just wantonly dropping their rifles. It's to simulate a sudden shock to the rifle. And the reason I use the shoulder height drop is because it's consistent for me. I could just as easily hit it with a hammer or knock it into a door frame, but that's not as consistent as just letting gravity do its thing, because gravity is going to be gravity. So I'm going to do one drop every 500 rounds. Before we get into this, here is a 5-round group fired to demonstrate the rifle zero. I did zero at 50/200. In this particular case, I zeroed it at 50 meters. I did not fine tune it at 200 because I wasn't going to be using the rifle for extreme precision at those distances. So this is just basically a 50-meter zero fired on 77 grain OTM Black Hills. Using that Roscoe 10.5 inch upper definitely helped me shoot a nice tight group, because even though that's a short sort of CQB or self-defense length or pistol length or whatever you want to call it, length upper receiver, I've known the Roscoe to provide really good accuracy. After that group, I went ahead and every 500 rounds did a drop test. Now, after the last drop test, here is another 5-round group for zero confirmation. Not only did it maintain zero, it looked good doing it. So dropping the optic or any sudden shock to the optic, at least throughout my 2,000 round review process with those 4 drops, no issues detected. And that's exactly what I want out of an optic. Of course, the next question is, okay, great, it's durable. Is it reasonably expensive, or is it just another expensive optic? You generally have to pay for quality. So you might be surprised to find that this optic comes in at a very competitive price to optics that have an established similar or greater, I guess if you want to say greater, I don't know how you do that, I guess over time, reputation for durability. This optic is going to give you a budget-minded solution while providing the durability and the performance you might expect to pay more for, which I think is what ultimately we're all looking for, right? We're looking to find things fast and cheap, but also reliable, and usually you don't get all three. Probably the only thing I didn't like about the 515 is the OEM mounting system. It is a quick detach, and I do like the quick detach system itself. However, I don't care for the riser. I would have liked to seen them default to at least a lower 1/3, and the kit that I saw online said that there's an optional riser, but I didn't get one in my box. So I had to go with a true co-witness height, which is something I really don't care for. And this is kind of nitpicky, but it's something that I think is definitely worth mentioning. Like the days of true co-witness have kind of, they're gone, they're over. We're moving past that. And using a true co-witness mount for night vision passive aiming is an exercise in aggravation. It's doable, but it's not something I would necessarily prefer. So really the only complaint I have is the mount that came in the box wasn't tall enough. Everything else so far over these 2,000 rounds has been excellent. It's been very well performing, and it's kind of boring in its reliability so far. It's doing everything I would expect it to do and nothing that I don't want it not to do. So I don't really know what else I can really say about it. It's an intuitive fast optic. It's got a reasonably sized window for what you'd want. The controls are easily accessed. I've got excellent battery power, or battery life, I should say, depending on which setting I'm going to use. And even if I want to run it super bright, I'm probably still going to get a year or more out of it. I mean, quoting 50,000 hours, I think it's setting 6. If I bump it up to setting 8, I'm not cutting too much off of that. And the 2032 is known as, basically a calendar battery. You're going to get at least a year out of it in almost any optic you put it in, based on the way that they regulate power and provide the actual reticle and what kind of notch filters in there to help prolong that battery life, if you will. It comes with a kill flash, which I've never been a super big fan of kill flashes outside of environments where kill flashes are needed. Although after the first couple magazines, I stopped really noticing it. It didn't really screw with my vision. Low light is generally the situations where I don't really care for kill flashes, but again, it's effective, but it's subtle enough that it's not going to be all up in my face like in the old school days with the kill flashes for the ACOGs that were, pretty aggravating. The reticle is nice and clean. Some reticles, some optics have really good reticles, really good battery life, but if you use in a certain brightness setting or certain situations, the optic almost looks smudged or blurry, and that's not something I've gotten from any of the Holosun optics, and the 515 is no exception. So the only complaint I really would have is the standard mount. I'd probably just switch that out for a third-party mounting system to give me a taller position on the optic itself. But aside from the mount, I don't really have any complaints. The optic performed well, and it's something I would highly recommend. I'm Eric Allen with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.